All right, it is 5:30 here on August 10th, 2021. Call the Policy, Finance, and Facilities Committee meeting to order. The meeting has been noticed in Evans Print Media Group, WCOW Radio, Magnum Radio, La Crosse Tribune, Sparta City Hall, and Sparta Free Library. Any changes to the agenda?
No.
I request a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
I've got one question on the agenda. I see public comment is not on here.
Correct.
Or not on any of them. Could you explain that?
Sure. As we've been trying to help our board run as efficiently as possible, we had moved requesting that, put it this way, that our community work through the information at the same process as we do. At the committee meeting, we are getting the information, and then we have 2 weeks to ask the questions before it goes to full board meeting. At that time, I feel that we would also get fully informed or better, more complete public input at that time too. A lot of times at the committee meetings, we'll have a public input, and those questions get answered during that meeting also. But also more information gleaned from the committee meeting will also give time to get those questions asked over the next 2 weeks before the full board meeting. And obviously, like all our emails and phones are always available too through that.
Okay, thank you. Second?
Let's see here, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. On the business, A is preliminary 2021-2022 budget update, Ms. Hauser.
Tonight is informational only, no action is needed. And please keep in mind that we're still in the preliminary budget process. So anything we talk about tonight is still definitely subject to change. And so some of these slides should feel familiar to you. And we do have 4 main budgets that the board does approve. Tonight we'll be focusing on funds 10 and 27, which are the general operations. And so there are 3 phases of the budget process. The preliminary budget, which is what the budget is in until it's officially adopted by the board in the month of October. And then we have budget revisions after that. So tonight we're still talking about the preliminary budget. And so for the budget timeline, I broke it out over July, August, September, and October. And so in July, we did get our first state aid estimate for next year. The biennial budget was actually approved in July, which originally we were thinking it could go into the fall. And we did complete our year-end audit in July. However, we have not yet received the final audit report. In the month of August, we'll continue to do that preliminary budget review, such as we are tonight. I will continue to get updated BEARD estimates on state aid as districts begin to file their year-end audits. And we continue to update salaries and benefits for any turnover that occurs throughout the summer. In September, we will have our official pupil count. And again, we will continue to review and revise the preliminary budget up until October, when we get the certified property values. We get the certified state aid amount on October 15th. And then at our annual meeting at the end of October, we will approve the budget and adopt the levy. So the revenue sources in Fund 10 and 27 for the operations, the biggest 2 pieces are state aid and the revenue limit. They make up about 78% of our total operating budget. And so the revenue limit is a combination of state aid and the tax levy, and it makes up over 77% of our total operating budget. And then that state aid makes up about 71% of the revenue limit. So the revenue limit variables, you'll see the major factors the timing of when I anticipate knowing those factors for this upcoming budget year, what we are currently estimating, and then what the previous estimate was that was presented to you a few months ago. So in calculating the revenue limit, you look at the base revenue, which is the year-end revenue for the previous year, and that estimate has not changed. You have the number of students, which there's a 3-year base, which is the previous 3 years, and then a 3-year current, which is the past 2 years, and then this year coming up. And so we won't know the current 3-year average until we do our pupil count in September. Based on the state biennial budget not allowing for mitigation of the reduced pupil counts that many districts experienced this past year, we did reduce our estimate for the number of students. As far as the dollar per student, the original governor's budget had $10,250. We thought we were being conservative at $10,100. The budget was approved with no increase, so it actually went back down to $10,000. For the exemptions, we do know the operating referendum amount. The private school voucher amount will not be known until aides are certified in October. And then you can see the state aid estimate on the last line. Go to the next slide. So in summary, the revenue limit, once I put all these factors together, it will be about the same as it was last year. So no significant change from our revenue limit for 2021. So state aid, the 3 big factors are adjusted membership, which is a year previous, and there was minimal change. So we do know that amount. The shared cost did increase quite a bit this past year, and that's due to the defeasance of that debt. So that $2.3 million that we paid in advance, this is where you're going to start to see it coming through in the increased state aid that we had talked about. And then the secondary guarantee, we again won't know until that aid is certified in October, but it's looking like it should increase based on the state budget that was approved. So as of right now, again, still subject to change, I am anticipating that state aid will increase upwards of 14%. Other state aid is special education aid, which we were originally budgeting an increase of 30%, and the state budget came in at 28.2%. And then the per pupil aid, we were budgeting an increase or an amount of $750 per student, and it came in at $742 per student. So jumping to the expense side, you can see that salaries and benefits makes up about 72% of our combined Fund 10 and 27 budgets. And then moving clockwise, we have school budgets make up 1.6%, academics 3.1%, student services just under 1%, operations and finance 22%, and then the superintendent budget 0.3%. So if we look at each of those categories at the major changes that are currently accounted for in next year's budget, salaries and benefits has an increase of 1.5 million. The vast majority of this is ESSER 2 positions. So our ESSER 2 grants that were coming in, we're really focusing on the targeted learning loss, which is those additional positions that we've talked with you about. So that's your largest change to salaries and benefits, and those are limited term. So when ESSER 2 ends, those positions would end as well. We also had the 7 new positions that were approved in the long range staffing plan, and then our typical CPI increases and teacher compensation model increases. The school budgets had minimal changes, the most notable being we're budgeting for a full year of transportation costs that we didn't quite get to do last year. Academics has a decrease. However, that decrease you're seeing in the increase in salaries and benefits. So previously we used our ESSER money for a lot of stuff, the air filtration systems and PPE and things of that nature. And now we're focusing that money in staffing. Student services has an increase. which is tied to the special education, salaries and benefits and transportation. So that's where you see the Fund 27 portion of those increases. Operations and finance has a decrease, which is almost all in the sale of the property. So we had a large transfer to Fund 46 last year, and we will not have that this year. Some other notable changes are long-range capital projects. Because we had the availability and the need on our long-range plan last year, we were able to do about $860,000 worth of long-range projects, and this year we're going back to kind of the status quo with about $500,000 of projects. We also did a lot of technology projects last year and just don't have that need this year with our rotation on our long-range technology plan. And then we have our scheduled increases in transportation and teachers on call. So in summary, we're looking at a decrease in total revenue. And again, minimal pieces of that are tied to the revenue limit. We are also looking at a decrease in total expenses. However, it is not as large of a decrease as total revenue. So right now, you'll notice on the budget that was attached in board docs, we do not currently balance. And the main reason for that is the pupil count being unknown right now, and then the state budget not coming in at even what we considered to be conservative estimates that we had originally. So we will continue to watch this over the next several months. And the goal is that when we come in October, we would have a balanced budget, or we'll have a strategy that we purposely put in place. And what I mean by that is we have our closure of our OPEB trust that we have as an option. We just put a significant amount of money in fund balance, knowing that that money would be there if we needed it. So we do have some options, but I just want you to be aware that as of right now, with the state budget coming in the way it did, and without knowing our pupil count, at this point, we currently do not balance. Any questions?
I've got some questions here.
Yeah. Mr. Luke, ask the questions here.
Could you go back to page 14? Yes. I'm a little, I need clarification on the chart there for the student services. You got transportation in that area, and then you have transportation in the operation and finance. What's the difference?
Yeah.
I mean, why wouldn't it all transportation be in one category?
Yep. So we have to track transportation for regular education buses and specialized needs or special education separately because we get funded differently on those. So it's the same transportation contract, but we track the cost separately. And we're able to do that because special education buses, only students with that need identified in an IEP can ride on those buses. So that's the reason why it's separated.
And then another question I got, Leah, is if we go back and look at the chart with the scale for state aid and that, I don't know which.
Yep. One more. This one?
No,
8.
back. Keep going back.
8.
Number 8, I guess. That
That
one.
one.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Okay. Equalization aid. That's the county, the school district value. Is that correct?
That makes up a part of it. Yep. So that's our state aid or our general aid, which is based on equalized property values. That is a factor in that. Correct.
So in light of the fact that the city of Sparta is going through a reevaluation and most properties have gone up in value, our county has gone up in value.
Yep.
This scale here, how does that affect that? Is that on the tax levy side that is going up, or is it on the equalization aid going up?
It could be both. So when we talk state aid at the district level, we're talking about it as the average of the 14 municipalities that we serve. And so when it gets to October, you'll approve one tax levy and one mill rate, which will be a blend of all of them. And so that's important if you're talking to constituents to say, we don't want to say, well, we only had a 1% change in the tax or in the mill rate, so therefore you'll only have a 1% change, because some municipalities may have a 10% change, some may have a 5% decrease, so they average out. And so likely what could happen with the reevaluation is that the city of Sparta would have a larger share of the total tax levy because they have a larger piece of the pie, if you will. And then depending how each homeowner's property value changes, it could be reflected differently on each individual bill.
I guess how does that relate to the state aid is what I'm getting at. Are we going to get more money because
Yeah.
with this scale here?
So state aid, the equalized property values are per a specific date. So it would depend on the timing of how the city, I don't know enough about the city's timing to know if it would be caught in this year's equalized value or not.
Okay.
What I can say is that if our revenue limit, right now we're projecting not a major change, and we are projecting an increase in state aid, that would drive the tax levy down, generally speaking. So we are set up for an advantageous spot as far as our tax levy this year. But as far as the actual amounts, it's a little too soon to start putting numbers out.
Yeah, I just wanted to get that last statement from you.
Yeah.
And then too is, you know, I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but, you know, the way it's looking like the states are getting this new case of COVID. And if we happen to go back into a situation, we had talked about the funding for the mitigation, the masks, all the soaps and so on and so forth.
Yep.
Is there something budgeted in the budget to take care of that in case they don't supply us with a CARES Act or something like that?
Yep. So ESSER 2, which is kind of our third round of that funding from the federal government, we have not fully allocated it specifically to hold some in case we need it. And then in addition, just this past week, I believe DPI has put out the ESSER 3 funding calculations. So not only do we have the ESSER 2, which we currently have the dollar amount and have the budget allocated, we also have continued confirmation that that ESSER 3 money is coming. So basically our federal funding should help cover those costs that you're describing.
Okay, no surprises in other words.
Not at this time.
Right
Not
now.
at this time.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Ashman?
So could we go back to the screen it as budget change category? Okay, got it. Do you know what, okay, you've got 3 items in here. The ESSER positions, the 7 positions from long-range planning and the CPI.
Mhm.
You've got those bunched into 1.5 million. Do you know what they are broken out?
I do have that in my office. I do not have it with me,
Okay.
but I can get that for you. All of those positions were previously approved individually, so I have those previous approvals. I can get those for you.
Okay, and then I really think that the board needs to go back and revisit the long-range staffing plan. I mean, it seemed like a really good idea at the time, but seeing what has happened with the staffing, the number of students that we have enrolled, I'm not sure if how do I want to say this? How can we know what the need is for next year and the year after that? Because what I'm afraid will happen is we'll get into, well, we budgeted the money, it's in the budget, we'll hire some people. And it may be a stretch about whether we really need them or we want them. So I think that I would like to revisit that sometime.
And if I may, if you recall last year, we didn't use all the positions, and the staffing plan for this year, there are still 4 positions we didn't request. part of what we do when we do those staffing plans every year is we review what the projected class enrollment is going to be at each class, and we do the shifting in-house before we add so that we can calculate for any decreases so that we're not increasing as much. So that is part, I think, I wonder if what might be just as helpful is to review our process for coming up with that staffing plan, because that is all part of the staffing process.
And I would add that we're doing a review of our teacher compensation model this year. And as part of that review, that would be something I'd want to make sure we look at anyways. So our actuarial study is as accurate as possible. So the timing's perfect to do a review like that.
And then one other question, and maybe I didn't hear you right, but did you say our state aid was increasing 14%?
As of right now, that's what I'm projecting, yes.
And I don't know all, I'll come in and talk to you.
Yeah.
'Cause what-
The biggest reason for that is our shared costs are up by that defeasance. So our shared costs went up $2.3 million. So if you remember a few months ago when we talked about paying that debt down, I said it'll positively impact our state aid this coming year. That's what you're seeing.
Okay.
Thank you. Any questions from any other board members? Thank you, Ms. Hauser.
Thank you.
All right, and letter B is discussion and possible recommendation to approve a request for proposal for Memorial Field. Dr. Van Doren.
All right. So you were sent a draft of an RFP. This RFP is done by the same individual who helped us with the other RFPs that we've done in the district. We've had good success. We did get feedback when we had the pre-proposal meeting with firms on the Herman building, came up to us afterwards and said that was one of the best and most thorough meetings that we've had. And what a good RFP does is it ensures that we get all of the information that we need from anybody who submits one to make a good decision. So at this time, the field renovation is set to include, before we get into this, let's just say that I want to talk about the overall moving forward with the project, and that this item is about just the pieces in the RFP. So we're talking about the artificial turf for football and soccer, the LED athletic field lights, the replacement bleachers. The bleachers currently, what our available bleacher capacity is about 1,400. And if you've ever been to a game, you'll see that there's people all around the entire stadium. The press box, the scoreboard, the fencing, and we were not able to get a full track there because in order to get a full-size official track, it would extend to the far curb of Rusk Avenue. So that took that piece off the table. In discussions with a number of board members and with community members and looking at different options, there has been significant discussion about the potential for high school, even possibly the middle school. At the end of the day, there is an attachment to Memorial Field from a tradition standpoint. There's a really nice new, very new facility for concessions and changing in restrooms that we could certainly add on to, but it's a good facility. It's a very picturesque spot, and it's in an area of town that has been built up and revived, and there's as many reasons to keep it where it is as there are to think about moving it. So presuming that we would move forward with renovating Memorial Field. I think one of the issues with Memorial Field is that if we didn't use it, we would have to think about how we purposed Memorial Field, because I can't imagine that field just sitting without a good purpose to it. So anyway, press box, scoreboard, fencing, walking track. Construction costs at max 2.6. This is where our budget is so that people submitting proposals kind of know what ballpark we're in. The soft costs, the FF&E, the geotech permits, et cetera, 400,000. Total projected cost, right around 3. Next slide. So there is a timeline in this that contemplates moving forward starting August 25th. If renovated field is something that we would like for the fall of 22, we would want to move sooner rather than later, but obviously all of this can be adjusted. Next. So the other items in the proposal is the pre-proposal meeting. What criteria we'll use to evaluate. This is something you've seen from on the other proposals we've done. You've seen Mr. Stearman use this. We've got our evaluation criteria and assigned points. The submission of qualifications, what we require, the work plan submission, the project cost, there's safety information, the interview process we would use, and we have a lot of supporting documentation, some forms to indicate our expectations on these items above so that they fill in all the information that we want, and maps of the location. So that was all in board docs for your review. Next. And I'll take any questions.
Any questions from committee members?
So that $2.6 million, was that the number we originally talked about?
That's the number we were at.
Because I know there were some other projects we wanted to fit in there.
That is the ballpark of what we had talked about.
And
We
then
can adjust it downward if you'd like. I mean, that's why we're having this discussion
my
right now.
question is, because I know we talked about doing some things in the auditorium.
Mhm.
Are these other things still going to fit in?
Yes.
To the budget that we have?
Yes.
Yes.
So that 2.6 does not include the track.
At this time, no. We could dial that back.
No,
Oh,
I
it
just
can,
was
it,
wondering
right, yeah.
if the 2.6 had that, whether it went to the curb or not,
Mhm.
if it was included in that 2.6.
But no, the walking track is included in the 2.6.
Is not,
Is included.
is
The
included.
walking track, not a track and field track.
Okay. And because this is going to, if we go through with this, when we say fencing, all the tracks that we have up here, the walking tracks around our facilities and that, is it concluded that fencing is going to keep people out? Or is the public going to be able to use that walking track? If it's put in
The
there?
whole idea of the walking track is public access,
Okay,
whether that's 24/7 or whether that's during the park hours.
okay.
But there's fencing around there now, and we would certainly want that, especially with the water close by.
And then next question is the 2,000 or the 1,500 to 2,000 bleachers, you know, for bleachers. You said that we have 1,500 seating places and there's still people sitting around.
Mhm.
So is it my understanding that we're replacing the existing bleachers, or are we adding 15 to 2,000 more possible bleachers to take care of the people standing around them?
The existing bleachers are at the end, past the end of their life. So it would be a complete replacement.
So are we going to address the people that need a seat that are standing around the area?
The 1,500 to 2,000 seating capacity for that main set of bleachers should get what we need. We didn't, that was a conversation we had with our athletic director, and so that
Okay.
we know what the capacity is. The general thinking is the price goes up quite a bit when you get to that 2,000, but if we build it now for the future, we have those spaces.
And then the last question, if we start this project this fall to accommodate it for next fall season, the field is going to be expanded because of soccer.
It'll be moved as well because the placement of the field is so close to where the bleachers are.
Okay. So we have to do it all at one time then. Okay. Thank you.
Only question I had was, so again, with the 2.6 number, that is our number that we came up with when,
I'll double check that.
okay. And
We
then,
might have come up with 2.25. We might have put a buffer in there.
and so this number is
Whoever
adjustable.
comes, oh, absolutely, yes. And this is to let those that are bidding on it
Yep.
know kind of what we're looking for and what we have to spend,
Mhm.
you know?
And when originally thought, the original thought process was with the track and field track. So we can keep in mind to pull that in a little bit too, with just I'm assuming walking track is just a asphalt circle. Nothing fancy.
Yeah, but I've come to understand that just in a
Mhm.
school district world is never just
Right.
So
But it's not like a special material though.
I'm sure there will be many different types of
Okay.
walking track materials that we will review.
Sounds good. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Mr. Rasmussen?
I really think we need to tighten this up a little bit.
Mhm.
I mean, we're currently at 1,400 seating capacity.
Mhm.
Now, is that the bleachers on both sides, or is that just part of the site?
That's everything.
That's everything.
Mhm.
Okay. When I go around to the different venues, Toma, they have everything on one side.
Mhm.
Are we talking about that, or are we talking about splitting it up?
We're talking about one side to get
Okay.
to get enough space for that soccer field and to get some distance between the stands and the players huddle.
Okay. And then as far as, do we know what the capacity is in Toma
Not off the top of my head,
or
no.
West Salem? I think it'd be good to know those numbers
Mhm.
because when you go to those games, you can get a really good idea of how full these places can get and
Mhm.
if somebody's overbuilt or underbuilt. I really think it'd be good to know that. And, to go from 15, well, we can go 15 to 2,000. I think we need to come up with a number.
Okay.
We want 2,000 or we want 2,200 or, what do we want? So that
Well-
everybody's on the same, otherwise you're going to get a bid at 2,000 and then you're going to get some guy that comes in at 1,400.
Yes. And I suspect that's information that our athletic director would have and perhaps one of our football coaches. And I need to get this information. If I'd known it before the meeting, I probably could have those numbers for you. I don't have them this second right at the top of my head. But I can get those and that's, Yeah.
I think they're critical to know.
Any other questions from other board members?
I just was going to make one quick comment of just thinking of taking a step back. If we can't do our ideal project at Memorial Field, what would that look like? Other options, right? If the goal was the track and that whole complex piece, do we need to go back and consider other options like above the high school or right some of those layers, or do we stick with Memorial Field? So that's just one thought that I'm going to put out there.
may I?
Good.
And when we did the facilities, when we did the meeting with this, facilities projects, we looked in depth at the high school. The high school has a track that is slightly not regulated, and the space inside the track isn't big enough for a football field. By not a lot, but it's not big enough. So that would mean tearing up everything there and starting from scratch. There's also an issue with the amount of handicap parking and with the hill. So those are some of the issues that got brought up. And then the more we got to thinking about it, and something else to consider is we could put LED lights on the track up there for a lot less than building a whole new track. So I did speak to some people about our spaces at Meadowview Middle School, and the consensus was there may be enough room out there, but not necessarily. And then, of course, to repurpose the memorial field, I was told it wasn't big enough for baseball. So what do you use it for? And there would likely be some cost in repurposing and maintaining that. And I don't know that we want to maintain 2 football fields because football fields are expensive to maintain. So those are some of the discussions that happened. Obviously, if the board would like to revisit that, they can.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
I got just a comment. I just want to remind the board about what the other area districts have done recently. Melman has turf, GET has turf, Westby has a brand new field. Logan, brand new turf field. Central was in the process of looking at turf field. Holman, I can guarantee within 2 to 3 years, will have a turf field. Toma is now starting the referendum process, and one of their options is revamping their entire athletic facility, which I can guarantee you will include a turf field. Okay. In order for our district to be something as looked at as a destination district, that's one of those things, unfortunately, in our environment, we are going to have. I mean, especially when you look at other districts in the area, like Melman, they have a turf field and their enrollment is maybe a quarter of ours. So this is definitely a doable project. It helps us retain things. It helps us show our commitment to both our athletics, but our community as well. So I think this is a great project that we really need to look at. And I know I'm a biased individual when it comes to this, and I will openly admit that. So
I got a comment on that. I'm looking at it more along the lines of discussion that I've had, and with the possible gopher attack on the football field and the possibility of right up to game time of canceling the games. I'm looking at this as a safety requirement, not only just for the bleachers, but for our players and athletics. I mean, we don't need, to have a game canceled when we've got 1,000 people wanting to see a football game, and it's canceled because we had Mama and Papa Gopher go through the whole field. And we've talked about this, Josh, where it's been, the athletic director and other people had to go out and prepare the field at the last minute so the game could go on. So it's far more than just a light to have because other school districts are. I classify it as a safety issue, and it should be done if we're going to have that kind of athletics go on. That's all I got.
and just one last comment. I do echo James's comment on tightening the capacity rather than giving such a wide range. It would be nice to have a much narrower thing. So when we do get those RFPs back, we can actually do a true apples to apples comparison as opposed to. So
Is the committee leaning toward a more generous capacity or as little as we can get by on?
I think that goes back to what Jim had said about, what the need is. And you should get that information from the athletic director. I mean, we can wait on that, I mean.
We can bring that back to the full board.
Right, we should bring it forward full board. But I'll make a motion to go ahead and approve going forward with an RFP process for the Memorial Field.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Right. Go to the full board with additional information being gathered on bleachers
And
and
yeah,
costs.
what I'll do is make some more specific capacity recommendations, perhaps keep it in a range of 200-ish.
I think that's more comparable.
And then I'll review those budget numbers and make sure we're where we need to be when we take out
Yep.
the track to a walking
Yeah.
track.
Could we,
Just a comment to one of Ed's. You know, there's guys that like to run back and forth from end zone to end zone. I'm one of them, if I can, so the seat isn't that important to me.
Dr. Vender, could we get a layout of those projects and estimated costs
I'd
that we
rather
were
run back and
planning on? And
All of them?
just so we have a comparison, knowing what else we were looking at doing.
Okay, because the equipment for the auditorium is already ordered.
Okay.
So we know it's already in there.
Okay. Thank you. And C, then we have discussion and possible recommendation to move forward with the Memorial Field renovation project.
All right, next slide, please. Thought I'd show us some field. This is actually a really nice picture, but you can see the bleachers and you can see how little room. That's where the team is. And I have never been in a football field where you can, as a spectator, just basically walk up and be part of the huddle, which is really cool to have that experience. But I can see Josh shaking, Mr. Lyden shaking his head over there. Not so much. So you can see the Kiwanis shack there and the extra seating where we've got it. During a game, there's people all around that. Next slide, please. And then, I'm sorry this isn't a better photo, but there weren't a ton of them available. You can see it's on a beautiful site. We've got Perch Lake in the background. Our bleachers, there's just not much there. And very, very sparse wood structure for the press box. And then we have our very nice gridiron club and our Spartan. So, and right now we have the back of the police station coming up relatively close to that service road. So this has a little different feel to it even already from this photo. Next, please. So if you recall, there's been a process for this. I know we haven't visited in a few months, but Memorial Field was at the top of the list with the Facilities Forward Committee. They brought the recommendations to the board in April. At the end of May, the board voted to move forward with the process of seeking proposals through RFP with and without a track. I told you I would bring the proposal forward before we actually went to RFP. But I do want to make some corrections that as I explained, we can't fit a track, so we're doing it with the walking path. And I do think it is problematic to ask people to put together a competitive bid with the amount of information that we're asking for if we're not committed to doing the project. I think for one thing, in today's market and fluctuation, prices can change, things can change, whether or not we can get materials, whether or not our firms can staff their projects. I mean, we kind of have to work with today. And I do think we run the risk of not attracting the highest quality. If we're not committed, it's kind of hard to expect that we're going to get a high level of, hey, commitment, we're ready to go, we really want the project. I think one of the really cool things about this particular project is that we're not asking for more loan money, for more tax funding, for more. This is partly funded through the sale of other buildings and through our fiscal responsibility in Fund 46. And I think that's very important that when a firm sees that, they don't have to worry about waiting until April to see if the referendum passes. We have a good chance of attracting really high quality and really competitive bids. So next. And I put this up and we had several questions from the Facilities Forward Committee that, and I'm sorry it didn't translate so well, but it's not just the athlete, it's band, cheerleaders, spectators, students of all ages, communities, music. It's a central location. It improves the community. So the bleachers are one of the pieces that has been in our long range plan. So that's nice too, because it's another thing that ticks it off. And it does align very well with our long range plan. And I believe with where we're going with our strategic framework as far as the importance of co-curriculars and athletics to sort of bring everything together. Yes, and this is a legacy project. Like a Herman, this should outlast many of us. Next slide, please. So,
Thank
any
you.
questions?
Any questions from committee members?
Um,
Mr. Rasmussen?
As far as the durability of, what do you call it? It was AstroTurf. What's it called? The turf. Is it, these are just things that I'm thinking of as we go through this. Is it going to be strong enough to support and not be damaged by the stand for the graduation?
Yes,
Okay.
we
good.
talked about that. We were worried about that too.
Okay. And then as far as the goalposts, is the soccer field going to fit in? Or is it going to be short?
You are the first person that has asked the goalpost question. I do not have the goalpost answer. Again, it is one I can get.
Guess what?
It is an answer I can get for you. How that the soccer, everybody talks about the lines. Nobody talked about the net.
Well, the reason being is when my son was in soccer and they played Toma and Toma, the goal net was right underneath their goalpost. And they actually had a ball hit the goalpost and bounced into the net. And Toma won the match. It didn't go over real well.
Oh,
And I think they actually had to shorten up their soccer field. So I don't know. It'd be a good question.
this is done commonly enough that this will be like any other project, Mr. Rasmussen. If we get to the point of doing it, you can come to the design meetings, you can come to there'll be plenty of involvement. What they did is Mr. Weebelhaus spec'd out a turf that was a good quality turf. He worked with Mr. Blaha, and they've done these throughout. He's been involved in RFPs, knew something about the different turf types. So as we look at the proposals, we can look at the turf that they're proposing using. And we know enough now, having done Herman, that when we can, it's nice to spec it out X brand or better, or X brand or equivalent. If we have our heart set on a specific something in an area, we don't want to overdo that. But for example, our HVAC, it needs to play with the HVAC that we already have, right? If there's a field that the board is like, this is the one we want, and we're really, and the equivalent isn't going to cut it, that's certainly a decision the board can make. So there's still a lot of decision points along this way, and that'll be looking at the area.
Well, my question is the soccer field going to fit in that?
They told us yes.
Okay.
I do not know if it will fit in such a way that an errant kit could not somehow bounce off and create a goal for the other team.
Well, I guess my question, I had to throw that in there.
But I'm bummed, right?
But anyways, my question probably should have been, will it shorten up the soccer field?
I was told that both fields would fit.
Okay.
We don't have length for a full track. We do have length for a full soccer field.
Okay.
So Kasich?
Is there special equipment for upkeep of a turf field that we're going to have to figure in with this RFP? Just like when we did Southside and they put that special flooring in, we had to have cleaning equipment, special cleaning equipment for it. Are we going to be set with that? I don't know that much about turf.
That's a question to be found.
I will find that out.
Okay.
Yes, that's a great,
Because that should be part of the package
Mhm.
deal too, is to have Mr. Fromm have the adequate tools to maintain that field.
absolutely.
Great, yeah. Yeah, I feel absolutely this is a project that we've, to be able to reinvest back into the community from our building sales. And it was definitely on the top of the list of, with our community study. So to be able to get back there and from a responsible manner, I think this is something that we should be ready to be able to go forward with, especially since a lot of facilities with that field are very outdated and past their usable point. Any other questions from committee, other board members? Hearing none, I take a motion.
We did motion on
You
it
did.
already. Yeah, to pass, go forward with it. I made the motion. to go forward
Second.
with
Thank you.
it.
All right, motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And item D, we have discussion and possible recommendation to approve revisions to board policy 431, service learning under consensus.
All right, so it's not as simple with our service learning requirement to say that we're going to add it back in, right? Because it affects 4 years of students. So discuss this with Mr. Russ at some length, and he is recommending that we scaffold it in as shown. And that we also add that students may use any accumulated service learning hours earned during the time that the suspended requirements were in place. So if students do have an opportunity to engage in some service learning and they feel good about doing that, they can and it can count. Pretty straightforward.
Okay. Any questions from committee?
Move to approve.
Next slide,
I
please.
have one question
Okay,
for you.
go back.
Were you able to get an answer on the high point requirements?
High Point does not, unless there's a specific waiver of a policy,
Mhm.
then all of High Point students are required to follow the same policies that the rest of Sparta students are. So they would follow under this service learning. I talked to Dr. Burnett, and
And does
they
that,
are intending to follow that.
does that start at grade 9 for them or right away at grade 7?
It'll start at grade 9,
At grade 9 for them, okay.
but they will be there's part of that service learning. High Point could go ahead and add an additional service learning at their school if they wanted to
yeah.
include 7th and 8th graders. Absolutely.
Sure, thank you. Any questions from other board members? None? Take a motion.
Make the motion to adopt the service, that suggested
Second.
changes to the policy.
Thank you. Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Great. Pass 3-0. And item E, a discussion and possible recommendation to approve revisions to board policy 907, delegation of authority under consensus.
Next slide, please. So at this time, I am recommending that we codify what we've kind of pretty much come up with, and that is the board decides the masking requirement and the instructional delivery. Are we in person, cohort blended, or virtual? And any closure of district facilities beyond the scope of one school for 14 days. And then the Board of Education, shall authorize this authority to superintendent for implementation and management of COVID-19 mitigations, accept masking requirements, and temporary quarantine or isolation of a classroom, grade level, or one school building for up to 14 days. So there's nothing new here. It is amending the policy to reflect where we've ended up.
Alrighty. Any questions, comments from committee members? Hearing none.
I I've got a comment on these policies. This was a direct result of us discussing for 2.5, 3 hours on the policies. Was this one of them?
No,
It was not.
this is an existing policy that we are amending
Okay.
to reflect how the practice has changed.
Move to approve.
Any other questions from other board members?
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Goes to the board 3-0. Item F, discussion and possible recommendation to approve revisions to board policy 100 definitions under consensus.
0100 was a policy that we reviewed. Actually, as we reviewed the 1,000 policies, we came back to this to clarify some terminology. I anticipate that as we go through the rest of the board policies, we will find other terms that we want to be consistent throughout the whole document. So essentially, Director of Business Services, Business Manager, Student Services, Pupil Services, we have one term. Director of Business Services, Director of Student Services, Director of Instructional Services, and Superintendent. Those are the titles.
Any questions from committee members? So I'm assuming then, will this come back to us if we need to add to it, or is it just going to be?
I presume at different months, as we go through chunks of board policy, if there's something like, ooh, we're not consistent about this, we need to be,
Mhm.
we'll go back and amend a definition here and there.
Thank you. Questions from other board members? Hearing none, take a motion.
I'll make the motion for the changes on the definition.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passes 3-0 to the full board. Item G, discussion and possible recommendation to approve revisions to the Sparta Area School District Pandemic Handbook. Dr. Van Duren.
All right, this is outdated. Our pandemic handbook from last year was FFCRA. It had telework with the color model. It had all the things that we did when we were kind of planning for the throes of stuff. So what we've done as we've eased back open is we've also fallen back on our existing handbook provisions, our existing staff benefits to handle whatever absences are necessary. So because we don't have specific benefits and directives tied to COVID, that these can be communicated through procedural means, and the handbook covers what's needed. If, for example, the handbook says your working hours are from 7:30 to 3:30 is your contracted day, and the principal has the authority to schedule you during that day. If we need to include a COVID mitigation as part of that scheduling, I don't need to go to board approval and have a handbook for the principal to go and make that change. So the mitigations and things that we're doing have become enough second nature. They are the processes that we use. We are back to not having that extra pandemic paid leave. We're not using the color model. Right now, we're using the model, the board superintendent kind of division of duties model, for lack of a better way to label it. So I think the easiest thing at this time is to let this, rather than try to tweak this to fit what we do now, we're better off having this just go away. And if there are things we need to do that are COVID specific, we can either add them as addenda to our existing staff handbook, or if it's procedural, we just put it in our procedural documents.
Any questions from committee members?
I think this goes along with the idea of simplifying all the documentation so that it is clear to the board and to the community as a whole. and there is no contradiction between one document and another document. When we first started, we had limited information about COVID-19. And I think that the handbook in and of itself is going to be addressed as we go through the policies that we have. So the recommendation to go ahead and eliminate it is not that we're eliminating the verbiage. We are putting the needed verbiage to address the situation in the document so that it's clear and concise in one place with the policies, correct?
You are correct with the simplification, and the language is addressed either in policy or in a procedural document, yes.
Okay. I'll make a motion to approve our recommendation approval, send it to the board to eliminate the handbook at this time, pandemic handbook.
Is that the correct wording to eliminate?
Huh?
Is that the correct wording to eliminate? Yes, okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from the board? Okay, take a second.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. That's 3-0 to full board.
Okay,
Ready. And item H, discussion, possible recommendation to approve revisions to board policy 903, telework under consensus.
all right. And this is one of those instances, telework is addressed in the handbook, it's addressed right here. So could you please click on the link to Board Policy Article 903? Because these are small changes that cover several pages. That is really hard to see.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. So the first change is under definitions. So scroll, please. There you go. Telework dash number 4. And then number 2 under that, we would strike a work alternative, e.g. FFCRA. Telework is not an employee benefit, but rather a possible accommodation based on job content, which would be correct. We would also eliminate the language there of the focus of the telework arrangement is on job performance and meeting the needs of the district, because it's not necessary there. We are discouraging the teleworking with the exception of when it becomes a accommodation for ADA or something else. When we get down to implementation, scroll down, please. We got rid of our references to the color model, red, orange, yellow, and we're just going with virtual or COVID. So virtual learning, if we have virtual learning again, all eligible employees may be asked to telework. So COVID, under number 1, you're subject to a quarantine or isolation order from a local health department, and this section includes whole class quarantines. Should we run into a whole class quarantine, we would want the teacher to telework and stay connected with those students as much as possible. We scroll down, and under administrative content, we make the same changes, get rid of work alternative and FFCRA, and the focus of the telework arrangement is on job performance and meeting the needs of the district. And the implementation, same thing, get rid of the references to the color model and go to COVID number 1. This section includes whole class quarantines. So that's the extent of the changes, very minor, to reflect that we are no longer using the color model.
Good. Thank you. Any questions from committee? And from the rest of the board? Thank you,
Move to
Dr.
approve.
Second.
All right, motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion 3-0. And letter I. We have discussion and possible action to approve board policy 0167.31, public requested agenda items at board meetings under consensus.
All right. This is one that's pretty straightforward. Mr. Rasmussen requested that we pull out the particular section of 0167.3 and make it separate so that it was more clear to the public. So that's what it looks like. There have been no other changes except to pull it out and make it its own policy.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Come through the way you want?
Yeah.
Great.
Good.
Any other questions from board members?
Does this address your concern, James?
Yeah.
Sounds good. Great. No questions? I'd take a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
All right. Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Alrighty, thank you. And Jay is the financial reports.
With it just being the first month of activity and not having an approved budget, I'll let the previous reports stand for this one as well.
Thank you, Ms. Hauser.
I
Move
got
adjourn.
one- I got one thing before we adjourn. I've gotten calls and I think there needs to be a clarification for the public in regards to our committee meetings. Because the committee meetings go ahead and have the members, 3 members of the board on a committee. When we vote in the committee, we're voting to send it to the full board at the end of the month. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a done deal, that all decisions have been made and it will be passed at the regular board meeting. It is a responsibility, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chairman, that if one of the committee members disagrees with the policy, they get 1 vote, and we're just simply recommending it to go to the full board for action. And that it's a clear indication. If it's 3-0, the 3 of us have discussed it, and it goes before the full board for a vote, possibly.
Goes forward.
I would recommend that we don't discuss this because that would be getting off agenda topic.
It is. Yes.
I felt that the public needed to know this because it's questioned as far as doing a deal behind the public's back. We're trying to be transparent as much as possible. So I'll end it with that.
Thank you, Mr.
Move to
Lukasik.
adjourn.
Second.
Motion and second for adjournment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye.